Alright, welcome back to another Conquest Corner Tactics. On these particular videos, I go things related to Conquest from Paragone Games that's more general information that anyone can use rather than specifying to a particular army. For this particular video, we're going to be going through range units, shooting, do you need it, how much of it should you bring, can you get by without it, all those sort of thoughts. Keep in mind, for if you're wanting to pick up any range units, I know at least for me, the Sorcerer King Archers come out soon, a few other things, but if you're looking to pick anything for Conquest, we do have a discount code in the show notes. It's Train Kickers. There's a link down there as well that saves you 10%, helps us out as well, and it's just a good way to be able to, save a bit and do something nice for us as well. And like I said, I know there's a lot of pretty good things coming out pretty soon, depending on which army you're playing, of course. And if your army isn't getting anything right now, hey, save your wallet some money. All right, yes, technically we save money either way. So for this particular video, the idea is, like I said, we're going to talk about ranged units. I find, especially the more as I play, this has been more of a consideration and a thought that I've been having, and I thought other people might be as well. I know at least sometimes, it depends on the timing, but I know sometimes when I look at it, I feel like maybe they don't do enough, all these sorts of things, and I kind of want to go through my thoughts related to all of that. How much you should include, why maybe you should, is there a reason why you shouldn't? We'll take a look at efficiencies and all of those sort of things. And the goal is to build up at the end for you to figure out how much range you need to bring and what you should do with them when you're actually at the table. All right, so we're going to start first here. We're going to start right here at the beginning to talk a little bit about the rules, just to make sure this is clear. Because obviously range is a little bit different in close combat. Range, of course, is an out-of-combat action, volley. There is, of course, its own form of inspired, which is take aim. It effectively does the same sort of thing. But importantly, for certain things, if you could not be inspired, that doesn't stop you from taking aim. So as someone who plays Old Dominion, who can't naturally take the inspire action, take aim is not the same action. So you actually can get that better volley when you decide to shoot. For shooting, keep in mind a few things. One, it's front rank only. So when we talked before, if you watch any of the videos or if you just played the game, combat units you tend to take in chunkier blocks. I mean, maybe your brute you take in threes, but a lot of times we'll take these, 3x2 or 3x3 or some amount of a combat unit. Because yes, the further ranks only do maybe support, or maybe they have a really good support, support several. But you're not quite as worried also because you might lose some models on the way and all those sorts of bits. Whereas for ranged, ideally, you're not getting attacked, or at least getting attacked in your front because some enemy unit has charged into you. So since you're hopefully avoiding those sorts of things, your size could vary. But the big thing is this, only the front rank actually gets to shoot. So taking a bigger and bigger unit means that you need to really spread them out to actually get any use out of that. So something important to think about. There's no such thing as support in further ranks for shooting. Excuse me. Line of sight versus distance. So remember, to have line of sight, you have to be in the front arc, because this is based on front arc. Remember, front arc is off your 45s on your unit. Later, we'll pop the TTS for anyone watching this to kind of talk through it. But for anyone who doesn't, I'll explain it, and I won't do the TTS stuff until the end, and I'll explain it enough that you can follow along without necessarily having to see it. It's off those 45s. But so that's to be an arc. To actually have line of sight, to physically be able to see them, you have to draw 1 millimeter. So effectively, don't worry about the actual width, but you have to be able to go from the middle of your stand, front facing, to theirs. So when we're doing this, for anyone watching, I thought I'd actually pull it up so we can kind of read through this to make sure we have it correct here. So the target regiment or stand has to be within the front arc. Okay, normal arc rules. At least one stand in the acting regiment's front rank must be able to draw an unobstructed 1 millimeter wide line between the center of its front facing and the center of any facing of the stand that you want to target. So that's what you need in order to draw line of sight. Line of sight does come from your center. So you have to be able to look from effectively a center of your front center to any of their centers. For being obstructed, you just have to be able to get any particular line through. They talk about obstructed a little bit later on. Here it is. For anyone looking along, we pulled up for obstruction. Again, it's from the center of your front facing to any point on the target stand. If it's interrupted by regiments or pieces of terrain that are equal or larger than either the size that is shooting or the size that you're shooting at, you're obstructed, you don't get to shoot. So you're looking from your middle, you're trying to hit them. But when you're doing this, when you're doing this, you are effectively able to shoot if the opponent is larger or if you are larger. So you can't be all equals throughout. That doesn't work. Keep in mind, infantry is size 1, brutes are size 2, monsters tend to be size 3 unless you have a rule otherwise. Certain things might have rules otherwise. That means if you're a brute unit, you have no problem shooting at or over any bit of infantry unless there's other brutes or monsters in the way. If you happen to be a monster that's shooting, the only thing that's going to actually bug you is very large terrain or other monsters. Obviously, for the other cases, terrain can matter as well. Maybe you guys do it different, but in ours, we have some blocking terrain, but it's not super prevalent because we just don't necessarily find that a very fun game mechanic to be stopping everything. So we have some of it. We usually don't run garrisonable terrain, but we will run some. But usually there's enough line of sights there. Effective range. So if you're within half range, you're in effective range, means you get an extra shot, and you might get other rules as well. Certain rules proc off of effective range and all. For arc, so when you are shooting someone, so you have an opponent that you are shooting, when you're shooting them, you look at the arc that they have stand by stand. So for this, we might actually pull up an example here using TTS. Again, if you're not looking, I'll explain it so you can follow along, but we'll put it up here. So effectively, we have a stand of marksman drones. They are shooting at a stand. I have a stand of just a whole ballista on the other side. And what we say when we talk about this here, when we think about what arc you're in, we take a look at this, say, first stand here. Obviously, there's no problem line of sight. We see it all just well and good. When you're looking for your opponent's arc, you draw a line through them, and we look to see where it crosses. So we see in this particular example that I've pulled up that one of the stands of this unit of marksman drones marksman clones. My apologies. I always get it backwards. To me, I understand they're different, but I always say it backwards. Marksman clones. That one of the stands is front arc because its positioning is front arc, but the other ones are not. The other ones are in the side. This game is done stand by stand. So if one of your stands is in the front of the opponent and one of your stands is in the flank, that stand treats it as flank. That means if they have shields, they don't get their shields. If they have phalanx, they don't get their phalanx. If there's any change to their rules, then they take those changes. So we do look depending on what everyone does. And that does mean some stands might be in effective range. Some stands are not. Some stands might not have line of sight. You do look at every little bit. So that's shooting in a nutshell. That's overview of the rules, making sure that we're all clear of what exactly that we're looking at. The next part of this is, do you even need to do this? Do you need shooting units? Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you have to play certain things a certain way or anything like that. And obviously, there can be arguments made for not including any of it. When we're looking at this, I do want to look from a little bit more of an open perspective, just personally. So one option, obviously, you can run an all combat list. I've run lists that have absolutely no shooting in them whatsoever. When I started with my Sorcerer Kings, I didn't build any of their shooting units at first. Now I do have some. I do have the Jinn. I have the Flamecasters. For whatever reason, I couldn't think of the word. I didn't have those at first because they're not the ones that I built originally. So I played with no shooting. It was fine. I think the Sorcerer can shoot, but I never bothered. It was never really a concern of mine. So I've played without it before. I'm going to get into it. I do think your lists are aided by the fact of having some shooting. And the other question we, of course, come in is, does it actually aid every single list? Are there lists that are actually better without any form of shooting whatsoever? What I would overall say for these two things, if you're debating whether or not do I actually need to shoot, so do you want to include any of these units into your army? When you're trying to think about if something is actually going to aid your gameplay, I'd like to look at it from a perspective of the why versus the why not. If you only want to bring in units that are pure combat, you can do that. Is there a better reason than not to do that kind of thing? So, for why shooting? So what might you think, do you need it? Can you get by without it? Of course. Do I think you're aided with it? Yes. Let's get into the why. So I shoot 1. You get an early pressure and early presence. So when we're thinking most shooting units, not all, but most shooting units tend to be light. And points-wise, they tend to be pretty in line with their, I don't want to say worth, because that's so subjective, but they're pretty in line with their regiment weight and the typical weights to that type of regiment in the army. In general, they tend to be a little bit cheaper than the close combat forms of comparable amounts. Now, as we get into that, part of it's because the stats tend to be a bit worse. But, price-wise, that's not an issue necessarily for the fit. Let's put it that way. But when I say early pressure, what this actually does for us, the typical shooting ranges, I would say, are 14 to 20. That's pretty standard for a lot of stuff. Not everything is, but 14 to about 20. Your combat units are not putting pressure on the opponent turn 1. They might not very well be putting it on turn 2. Depends on maybe in reinforcement lines or maybe you push there up. But you are needing at least probably till turn 3 to really start doing it. Now, there's exceptions to this rule, of course. I've seen certain lists have tons of Vanguard and all. Like, we have that. But in general, it's taking multiple turns before your close combat units really start to affect the opponent. Your shooting units potentially can do it much earlier and from safer or more varied positions. So if I have a unit of ghouls with their Vanguard, so they're moving up 18 inches, they're light, maybe I was forced to bring them in first, so I put them wherever I put them. But now you can react to it, and that's going to slow down their effect. Because in reality, they have to cross whatever gap that you put. So if I put them even in the middle and you go off to the side, you could realistically be, say, 20-ish inches from me. That's a minimum 2 turns of movement to get there. That's assume you don't do anything else or nothing else happens. Because I actually had to get to you. However, if I can get a shooting unit to those sort of ranges, that is potentially in range, or the following turn, move and in range. So earlier, you can be affecting what your opponent does. One thing obviously that I like is, and we'll talk a little bit more, is I try to have my shooting units go a little bit later, especially early rounds, because I want you to move up first. And I want you to know that I might be waiting for you to move up. But those shooting units, wherever they're going to sit, now I'm affecting effectively their range out. I have this whole sector. So if I happen to have, say Djinns or Caratids or something like that shoot 20, well, now I have this 20 bubble across the board. In reality, that's a whole lot of space. I was briefly there to do some math calculations to figure out a amount of 3 stands is going to take up in terms of sectors of area coverage and all of that sort of thing. You're taking up a good amount. You're not taking up, sub 10%, but even that, you're taking it up and choosing it in the spots that are going to matter for your opponent, because in reality, we could look at the overall, but your opponent won't be necessarily everywhere as well anyway, because they're not going to sit near the back objective. They're not going to be on your backfield, especially early. So all those sort of areas can be removed. So you're talking about usable real estate, taking up a very large portion of it, especially if you have very good range. So early presence, making your opponent make decisions early because you can reach out and do something to them. Efficiency. There's always a little bit back and forth on this. Like I said, your shooting units tend to have a little bit lower efficiency, or lower efficiency in general. Reason I say that, your volley characteristic tends to be lower than the average clash characteristic for a close combat unit. Most volleys tend to be on 2s, a couple are on 3s, but most of them tend to be on 2s, where I would say it's much more typical that a close combat unit is more likely on 3s. Again, there's plenty of options that show otherwise, but point for point, it's probably a little bit lower. If not that, then it's probably lower when you think of defenses, resolves, and or evades. Again, pound for pound, shooting units tend to have less. That makes sense. That's historically accurate as well. Shooting units, you couldn't wear all the heavy armor in order to do your job. You save that for essentially all the melee troops. So You do tend to be a little bit on the cheaper side, unless you're talking things like, like bow chosen or carotids or something. But typically, you tend to be a little on the cheaper side comparatively, with a little bit worse stats, but able to do these sort of range combat to effectively cause changes. Now, they're obviously, in general, again, unless there's rules that say otherwise, and we know some things have it, you don't get resolves in range. That does mean that your output is lower automatically. I mean, your stats tend to be lower, and you miss part of the potential damage that you do. Now, versus some armies, it might not matter as much because maybe they have very good resolve. They aren't really going to take you much anyway from it. But other armies don't have necessarily as good, and it is just opportunities that you're missing. Because even if someone's on resolve 5, you can roll 6s. So your efficiency, you do have less efficiency, round to round. Where you gain the efficiency overall, though, is the number of rounds in which you can be active and the ways in which you can be active. So what I mean by that, your shooting units can stay in the backfield and hold, say, if you have backfield objectives. I played a game the other day, and I don't believe this one was, I don't remember if this was one that was taped or not. Now we're currently taping most of the things we play, but not all of them. But I had some backfield objectives I could sit on. Sit a range unit on that. And then they're able to affect, essentially reach, one to maybe two of the other objectives, or at least the spots where the opponent's going to be. And since it's an objective in the back, the rest of my army is pushing past this. That means if you want to go and do something about it, you either have to deal with the rest of my army, which if you did, it doesn't matter anymore what happens to me, or have all these different units that could potentially intercept you. So, yes, pound for pound in terms of output, it's not as much per round, but they gain it back in one, being able to be effective in many more rounds. Your shooting units, after kind of getting set up, unless, your opponent just gave up that region or you ran through them in that region, your shooting units tend to be effective the rest of the game. So you get less per bit, but you get more of them. Your close combat unit is going to probably take more turns to get to the opponent. They might get stuck in, so you might have something that you're just not really chewing through as well, or maybe they chew through you. Survivability is a thing as well, because the only thing hitting your ranged early is their range type stuff, including potentially magic. And once you take out your close combat unit, my close combat unit takes out your close combat unit, your other units may not be there. It's a 6x4 board. I have to then, knowing the distance to you, I have to make exactly that number, assuming you don't do anything else. So depending on, unless you have a cluster of combat units, I've absolutely had cases where something is more towards the flank, take out a unit, and now my unit is 2 to 3 turns before they're effective again in any way. So you get less initial, but you get more overall. Or technically, I guess you get more initial, but you get less per instance, but more instances. The other part that's nice about it, like I said, when you think about all of this really kind of put together, is that it's also, one, dealing if your opponent has their range, two, dealing with your opponent's midfield holders, or potentially backfield holders, depending on where exactly you push them, or the ranges that you have. I used it actually very well when I was playing a game versus 100 Kingdoms. He was able to push his squires and effectively get to my table edge, because just how fast they moved and the way in which he moved them. I had a shooting unit come on right after that, and they normally combat units can't engage the turn they came in. If I couldn't have done that, he would have taken out my unit, rushed away. I was able to come in at such an angle that I was able to shoot him. I was in effective range, have other kinds of bonuses. I don't remember, I don't believe I destroyed them, but I took off at least 2 out of 3 of the horses. Broke them, was enough for my djinn to be able to finish them off. So you can react a little bit easier as well with shooting units. If you're delaying your shooting unit and the opponent is pushing up, now you can bring the unit on, maybe even from a side, and start putting that damage onto them. If it's someone that's a little bit lighter, especially maybe their lights early coming streaming at you, you are realistically able to take off stands. Maybe not in one individual turn, but across 2 turns, take a stand or 2 off. I mean, some of these units have 5 some shots. you have a pretty decent roll. They're saying only on 4 wounds a stand. It's not unrealistic that you might be able to drop a stand or so. One other plus, real quick, that I put down is that there's only so much space. Yes, it's the 6x4, but we all have hopefully seen when you put your full army out and you do start kind of tripping over yourself a little bit. So if your shooting can get into a spot where, again, there's only so much spot that you can close combat someone, you have to try to maximize your hits and all like that. So you might not be able to get more units into them, but I might be able to shoot in them because either maybe they're a larger target, I'm a larger target, I'm a little bit off to the flank so I can see them. For whatever reason those things may be, but I might be able to get a little bit more out of it. So sometimes this works out well because it just gives you more more space to play with. When we think of why maybe not to shoot. First one, of course, that you need line of sight. So that's something actually you have to keep in mind. You have to consider where you are, where you're placing yourself. Like I said, you have spent points on something that is not going to want to close combat someone, and overall needs to be useful in more rounds to make its points back. I don't prescribe to the idea of making your points back, really. Maybe we'll do a longer discussion on that, but it's a fallacy. But you do need to have that. And you could run into issues if you're, say, infantry shooting with a bunch of infantry models. Now you have to really be careful of where you place yourself. If unit, say, gets a charge in and takes off a stand or two, they might actually remove line of sight for you. Like I said, often squishy. Your ranged units tend to not be survivable. Caratids, yeah, bow chosen, decently. Slingers, just because they're 5 wounds with an okay resolve, but their defense is absolute garbage. When you look at the other ones, marksmen, the clones I've been using lately, they're what? Defense 1, no evade. So often you're very, very squishy. You have to be careful of how far you push them up, because if your opponent hits them, many of them, or most of them, maybe I should say, most of them will not stand up to that. And other than if you're talking about, say bow chosen or maybe caratids or maybe Sullivan, because they have a decent number of attacks on an okay clash, most of your shooting units don't want to be in close combat because their stats are bad for it. They're not designed for it. Which means even if the opponent just rushes across and gets to me, even if they can't necessarily do that much to me, they're removing all of my effectiveness. Again, there's some units where it doesn't match, but effectively, they're removing my effectiveness. So now I'm not really going to do anything to you. So that, of course, is a problem. The other thing is that they're a prime target. And this can actually be a useful thing. If I see a unit bow chosen on the other side, I know I either have to avoid their ranges or I got to go in there and get to them because they're 5 shots each. They have a deadly shot. I'm not going to stand. So 3 pack is throwing 16 dice. They're naturally volley 3. If they got to aim first, they're on 4s. All of that. They're actually going to put legitimate damage down on me, which means that they are a target of mine. Now, that's a plus and a minus. If you're controlling the opponent, so if you can hit my unit of bow chosen because I have this unit of Ugars waiting to take out your unit. Your unit's worth a lot more than mine in terms of value. And now I've removed one of my bigger concerns because I was able to hit you in the flank. That kind of thing. But just in general, since a lot of yours are more squishy, and early, if they have shooting, they're probably going to want to try to shoot your shooting units. Or if they have some very speedy, I'm thinking like a stalker sort of thing, or hunting packs, they have these very fast units. Okay, they're just going to hit these guys and maybe even just take them out. So you are potentially, if you're not careful, giving your opponent advantages because they can take out points of your army rather quickly. All right, so that's a bit of the downside. There's more upside than downside, and downside doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't do it. Downside is just things you need to consider that are just realistic for the scenario. But what we're going to talk about now then is how much should you include? What I find is my lists tend to run 1 to 2 units. It is rare for me now not to run any. And 3 isn't uncommon, but more than that is. I've seen plenty of lists with 2 units of bow chosen. I've seen plenty of lists with 2 bits of gin or anything like that, or marksman clones, or a variety. Obviously, some of these factions now they have the desolation drone, so maybe one marksman, one desolation, because they're doing different things. So I usually think 1 to 2. I would say if you don't tend to take any, start with 1. Start with something that's going to serve a purpose for you, or what you feel you have a purpose for. Experiment from there. I know if you watched the battle report that we did, Steve took mostly a GOATS list for city states. He took 3 ranged units, I want to say, and that was actually rather effective for him. Because again, oh, that thing's over there, it's weakened, I can try to take it down from here. Where otherwise, naturally, he'd never make it, it wouldn't happen. So I tend to do 1 to 2, but I do experiment sometimes with throwing a little bit more in. I would say, like I said, if you're trying to find the sweet spot, it does depend on the army. I think, like, if you're running Spires, you should be taking marksman clones, I feel, because I think they serve a really good purpose. 22 inches, good amount of shots, arcing fire. I don't even need to be able to see you. So, as long as one part of my army sees you, I see you. Very good range. And the fact that they have arcing fire means that they can hide. So it's much less likely that their defense 1's going to matter. When you're looking at Old Dominion, because of our general slowness, I think you do want something with ranged. So I do like taking a unit of Caratids. That's honestly about the only range that I currently rank. Obviously, our Centaurs are just coming out. I just don't have them yet. But I do like to take a unit of Caratids because I do like to be able to start planking damage in. Especially, I've used it to great effect before taking down monsters or starting to weaken up monsters for my close combat units to get in there. With that, I would say it's the more or less AP is something you have to consider. In general, if you have more AP, you have less attack. So Caratids are 3 shots each in general, but they're AP 2. When we look at Jin are 3 attacks but AP 1, where the flame casters are 5 attacks but no minuses. Bow chosen, no natural minus unless you happen to roll the 1s. Marksman clones, no natural minus kind of thing. So they tend to have more shots. So I do think you should bring some. I absolutely think you should bring some. I wouldn't bring too much. I've done that in some other bits. I've tried that in First Blood, which I know is a different game, but the basic ideas still hold. And often you lose too much survivability, I find, is the sort of issue that I run into. So I'm bringing some. I'm not going much more than that. Of course, if you're watching on YouTube, comment below how much you bring. The other thing we want to talk about then is strategy, how to actually maximize their use. So 1, I said it before, I do delayed activations early with my ranged units. In probably around 1, 2, and most likely 3, my ranged units tend to be some of the last activations I do, or the last activations I do. The only reason I would do them earlier is 1, you were in a prime position. So maybe a hunting pack, for example, they have a hunting pack, they've pushed forward, they're within a good range or a decent range. Yes, then maybe my shooting unit will go early. Otherwise, if effectively the shooting unit isn't going to be able to hit anyone, I'm making them go very, very late. That sounds like an obvious thing, and hopefully it is, but I have watched players miss time when they put their shooting units in because of the expectation of what the opponent's going to do. You do have to figure out what is your opponent going to do and what is the timing in which they're going to do that thing. Reasons why I mentioned that and that matters quite so much. As an example, what I watched, I saw a player, he went with his bow chosen early. And there was a unit of Raptor Riders. Bow chosen were, I believe, actually out of range. So they didn't end up doing anything. Raptor Riders go next. And they charged the unit that the bow chosen were effectively next to. That would have given the bow chosen their line of sight. Due to positioning, they had pure line of sight. And afterwards, I asked the player, I said, why didn't you wait on them? Like, when we look at this, we see that this unit was on reasonably the obvious target, which would put you in an effective range, which means you could aim and shoot, rather than like move and shoot and you didn't want to move because of your positions. So I didn't think of that. There are times you want your shooting to go early and times you don't. You can't have everything go before your opponent goes. I need my bow unit to go because I want to weaken the enemy that's about to hit them. If the enemy is really big, they're going anyway, so why bother? Go with your other choice of something that will help guarantee you don't lose a second unit. Because if they got like a 5-pack of anything, I don't really care what, anything coming at your 3-pack, you're done. So like, I don't play that game of let me try to get that little bit in. No, I do that if it'll make a difference. If you are maybe wanting to charge one of my other units, maybe then I have them go early. Maybe I'm ill positioned. Maybe I can't respond to your charge well. Okay, so maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll have them go early because I'm trying to delay my close combat units for you to move up or something like that. I know especially in, say, Sorcerer Kings, I can't delay with characters like I do in other armies. So maybe my shooting unit will go early to just even do a wound just to delay myself. But otherwise, if I don't have a good reason for going early, I tend to try and go late. I will even have them go sometimes after units that aren't on the board yet, or will shortly be on the board, because I want to see what you do. I want you to commit. I want you to position yourself in a spot where I can start getting damage on you, and then maybe I can bottom of turn, top of turn. I do look for that, especially depending if you have heal mechanics. If you have healing mechanics and I'm not going to be able to get my charge into you, then I want to bottom and top it. Because in that way, there's less likely a chance that you can heal in between. Look for character buffs. Look for things that they can do. Say, lately, like I was playing Marksman Clones, there's a shooting upgrade for your High Clone Executor. How do I think of the name? I know Nords have options to add extra things for shooting. I know city-states can buff their units by giving them fluid formation. Or, it might not be flow formation, loose formation, my apologies. Loose formation. So they're taking half the amount of shots. Your shooting unit taking half the amount of hits in shooting is very, very strong because it's shooting v shooting that you often kind of see. So look for what your units can do for them. Do you have upgrades? Do you want to put a character in there? It's ideal if your character can shoot if they go in there. But if they can't, if they can support a shooting unit very well, that could still be worth it. And for certain ones, taking a look at, say, Blooded or something like that, them and their options, I know they can take some shooting, aren't also bad because then they can actually fight their way. So maybe now your unit doesn't go away because the Blooded can actually do some damage. So what can I do to aid them? Is there aid? 1, do they need it? And 2, can I do anything? When I take a look at my Old Dominion, my Caratids, for my Caratids, I want to get them their memories of old. So I'll have an Archimandrite cast the spells so that way they can count as a tier higher. Hey, now they're getting their memories of old. They're getting the +1 shot fluid formation. I've used that before to rotate, shoot a giant, shoot a Jotnar, and put a bunch of damage on it and take it out. If they're not light, so if your range unit's light, you're probably coming in, like your turn 1, maybe turn 2. Let's just assume turn 1. So you're in there. But if they're not light, it's useful to have a light unit. I don't always take light units, but if I have a couple bits of shooting, ideally I want a light unit because I want to be able to potentially start up from a side. Again, since you're shooting and you can come on and shoot, I could walk in from the side and shoot into you, especially if you started pushing towards my line, because I've seen that happen many times. The other thing is terrain avoidance. Forests are a great thing to sit in because opponents lose a lot of their bonuses. They have a lot of their issues with shooting. Oh, excuse me. It's reasonably late for me, late at least right now. You're looking at hills can you stand on? Because remember, if you're on a hill, you add your size to the size of the hill. So if you're infantry on a size, say, 1 hill, now you're seeing over other infantry. So can you use the terrain to your advantage? But also be careful of line of sight blocking terrain, forests that you would end up shooting through. So you're in a forest, but to reach all the good targets, you're going to be going through another forest. Okay, maybe it's not worth standing in it then to reposition yourself. So wondering or worrying about where to come in related to terrain is a very big concern as well. All right, if you are only listening to this on a podcatcher, after this I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm going to look at a little bit of TTS to do it. I've effectively said most of my important points, so you're not really missing much if you don't. But otherwise, let's take a little bit. Sorry. I was clicked on the wrong screen. So when we take a look at this here, TTS, like I said, I have the marksman clones here, and I have some units Dweg over there because I like shooting at Dweg. Oh, and terrain got a little bit changed. I'll put this, let me rearrange this forest over here. Sorry, that got moved around because I made it a 4-foot board so I could just kind of show it on my screen a little easier. And then I clicked the button. So obviously, if I can, I'm going to sit in terrain. I'm going to move up as much as I can, say first turn. Second turn, if you're getting into range, I'll shoot you. Otherwise, I do want to move up, but I usually want to minimize it. Can I minimize the move to get to you? What that means is, one, if I can move 3 inches and shoot you as a target, yes. But even if I can't, it would take 2 moves to get there. I don't want, realistically, I don't want my shooting units to be getting more than, I don't know, maybe at most 15 inches up the board. I'll do more if necessary, but I'm really careful about putting them much further up because now they're getting into range of where the opponent a few turns in can start getting into them and can take them down. I want my shooting units to be, I want something they're shooting near the end of the game when you put your one single stand on an objective and I can take them out. That's the sort of stuff I'm looking at. Or you have 2 stands, you've taken a couple wounds, I need to do 2 wounds, that's going to break you. You've already went, you'll lose the objective, and I can't get a close combat to you. So I prefer my shooting units to do some plinking damage in the beginning and to be able to do some cleanup or mopping up later in the game. So I'm looking at turns 1, 2, 3, and then 7, 8, 9. The middle, sure. The close combat will be doing most of my lifting. I'm not so worried about that there. So for when you might want to come in from the side, we talked a little bit about these sort of things. If you have a good reinforcement line, you do have the ability to start reasonably far up. I would, again, probably put them at sort of that minimum that they need, but everyone's movement is enough to go about, not quite the 3 on, and then you can do a bit of the rotation, take up the last, which will get you, accidentally clicked the wrong button. There we go. I think they're about right. That then therefore gets you, if you take a look, you can see effectively the board. For all intents and purposes, back here, the opponent shouldn't be back here because then they're behind you. And even here, if they're trying to row themselves up, you can see them because there's only so much space they can have. Even your furthest ones, see them. So you don't have any problem with that. And notice, center to center, yeah, you're good. They're in your arc, and you can see all of these center to center. So you have pure line of sight to all of them. So what I find is if I'm not getting my shooting unit turn 1, then I'm hoping I have a light, and I'm either walking from the back or more likely, if they have a good range, coming in from a side as far up as I can, especially if they turn 3. If I have a medium, if I'm doing caratids or something, I want them to delay till turn 3 because I want a reinforcement line that's, where am I at right now? 12 inches. I can realistically have a reinforcement line, 20 inches or so up the board. I can pop myself forward. I'm going to move 6. I can be in good position. 20-inch range. I can be hitting targets quite far away onto the board. And let's face it, most missions are going to have objectives or something important near the end. So you're probably going to be near the end or near an edge. Or even if you aren't, then I'm putting pressure there and I'm making sure you will not show up anywhere near this edge. Because maybe you don't want to take 2 to 3 rounds of shooting as you come in and walk forward and try to get there. Obviously, the further you come up, the more likely your opponent is to hit you. But again, if I'm along the side and you want to hit me, you're going to have to reposition yourself. You're not going to be in an ideal spot because now you're facing either gives me flank charges. There's this terrain feature here, but if this isn't here, it potentially gives me flank charges. Could give me flank shots. Could give me flank magic. Or it ill positions you. So when you do take them out, maybe you inspired and clash kind of thing, you're having to spend a turn to rotate. Or one of your actions, I should say. So you are just not in a good position. So even if I do lose this unit, if I've tied you down for a bit and I've made you waste an extra activation, rotating, and then starting to move, that's a bonus to me. Is that if I'm a short range shooting, I don't tend to try to push them too far in the beginning. I let you come to me. because if I push them really far, that's a nice and easy target for you to go after. You do have to consider a bit of what your opponent's army has. If your opponent has a lot of very fast units, if they have a lot of cav, then you have to protect your shooting units more, which is very historically accurate. Because those are nice, easy targets for them to eat up and then continue going. They're not going to get slowed down. So they actually want to be doing that. So you have to be careful of those sort of things. If your opponent's a bit slower, you can be a little bit more cagey with it. You might be able to push a little bit faster. Or just kind of like sit a little bit higher up than I would naturally. So we didn't really show too much TTS there. And we can set up scenarios. If anyone's curious about various scenarios, obviously we can set up and go through some of those. I want us to be more of an overview related to it. And the scenarios are always very specific to exact conditions. But that can be done as well, where we talk a little bit more about particular scenarios. All right, as we approach this video getting longer than I would like, what I will say is every faction has something good to shoot. Well, I'm just gonna talk about the factions very quickly. Talk about their sort of shooting units. What I would take. 100 Kingdoms is called, of course, it is the mercenary crossbowmen. I'm not saying the other things aren't options, but it's mercenary crossbowmen because hey, it's 18-inch shots at AP1. And you can put your chapter mage in there who has some shots as well. Both in magic as well as actual literal shooting. So that's what you're looking at there. What do we got next? Spires, obviously marksman clones. We don't have to even talk anything more about. Dwegholm have several. Your Fireforged have very good weapons, 14-inch range, short, but it's 4 shots at AP2. And your guys are actually reasonably survivable, so you can slowly walk your way across the board. Or if you need something early, Whole Ballista do a pretty decent job as well, because 18-inch range, they're AP1, 3 shots, so less shots, but still overall very good, and they can put that early board presence, especially AP. If you have some AP or early board presence is really good, because early stuff tends to not have the great armor. Nord's Bow Chosen, of course, although, yeah, there's nothing else to talk about. I forgot. I know, what is it? Raiders? No, someone else I think has some shots. Can't remember who right now. Or maybe you can give them shots. It doesn't matter. Bow Chosen. Take Bow Chosen. I don't care what the Discord says. I think Bow Chosen are really good. Wondering, you got Slingers. Slingers, again, defense is bad. Resolve's not too great, but they have the torrential fire. They actually do cause some morale. And 18-inch range with the 5 wounds. 6 move. So quite good. And you got some good bonuses, and you got characters you can throw in there, of course. For Spires, the others are Desolation Drones, or Leon and Avatara. Marksman clones, yes, although the Desolation I'm really liking as well. They're very, very different. The Lethal Demise is great. The bonuses they give that they can hand out are quite good. Old Dominion, Carrotids. There's your shooting unit. Obviously, the Centaurs are a thing as well, and I like them a little bit better, I think, than the close combat ones personally, but our Carrotids are super, super strong. For city-states, Solani are quite good, and the Chariots, I haven't seen the Chariots in action. I rate them very high, personally, but I haven't honestly seen them. And obviously, you start having some monsters that can throw some shots as well. And Sorcerer Kings, we're about to get our Denorics the Disciples. Currently, though, we already have a couple other shooting units. We have our Flamecasters and our Djinn. I prefer Flamecasters personally. I have more units of Djinn. I think just because I just want them more shots. Although I will say, I'm somewhat changing my mind on that. And that's just because the army doesn't have a lot of cleave in it naturally. Or at least the units I currently possess and run. Other than like our monsters and all. So the fact that you have some armor piercing at 20-inch range, I do kind of feel I need that, because there's a few times where, again, they got a stand or 2 left. I want to take them out or break them. The armor piercing just helps me get through there, especially if there's someone that I'm struggling with. Because if I'm struggling with them, it's not because they have okay evade. I'm struggling with them because they have good armor. And I'm very excited when the hook comes out, because I kind of want the character on top. But hey, 20-inch range, 10 shots, and you're allowed to shoot, even when in combat. Free shots, stuff like that. I think that's really good. There's some other ones that have that as well. Of course, city-states get that with some of their big monsters and all. So All right, that gives us a little bit about shooting. So we talked about how to shoot, why you should shoot, is there any problems with it, how much do you bring 1 to 2 regiments of it, and plans to try and maximize it. So try to time it correctly, be willing to give up a little, a shot in a turn if it helps you out in one way or another. Try to buff it with various characters if you can. Try to get good reinforcements for them if you can as well, in terms of reinforcement line or good positioning, and use them to harass. Use them to define what's going to happen in the game. Make your opponent react to you. If you can shoot, say, turn 2, and start hitting their lighter unit that's wanting to do something in particular, now they have to respond to it. You can start taking off wounds, take off a stand. Now they're much less effective. So use them to control the board, as well as to use them to be able to, late game, if you can keep them alive, which I tried to, late game, be able to finish off what you need to. Because you're going to be down on combat units, you're going to be down on activations, and a shooting unit sitting on a backfield, grabbing you points, can get that done. Also, keep in mind, if you're going after objectives, they can hurt objectives in half range and effective range. So that also gives you options to be able to get some extra damage onto your objectives early. All right, that covers everything that we want to talk about for this one. So keep in mind, like I said, if you're wanting to buy range units or anything else, we do have a discount code. It's Terrain Kickers. It saves you 10%, helps out the show as well. We do thank everyone who does use it. So we also have a Patreon, but I push this more here because I'd rather you get something out as well as us, where the Patreon is kind of just more of us. I do want to put some content locked in there, but I don't lock much. And because I just don't believe that so much. So, if you're going to help us, help yourself as well, kind of thing. All right, you're going to see some more Fuzzball battle reports pretty soon. You're going to see probably some more big game battle reports as well as other ones, because we're recording most Mondays now to do some battle reports and all. At time of this recording, Dan's going to have his kid very soon, so he might not be around as much, but Steve will be. And I am building up some of my other army stuff for a little bit of forces, so we can vary it out a little bit when we do First Blood, as well as maybe vary it out when we play the full game. All right. And then you'll be getting, I think the next thing I'm doing is Spires, although I might be doing a sort of starting the faction things. I know I did the overview thing, but I keep seeing people pop up like, I bought this box. What do I do now? What do I buy now? So I think I might want to do something where I come up with, like 1,000-point starter lists or something like that to discuss. If you have any suggestions of what to cover, what you want to talk, what you want to hear about or discuss, anything like that, put it in the comments on YouTube. I look through all of that, and if there's a suggestion, I'll do it. A good suggestion of things that people want to see. That's the point of doing this. I like talking about it, and I like to see what people want. So just let me know what you're looking for. All right. Well, on behalf of everyone here at the show, then, have a good hobby and some great gaming.